I have a tough act to follow after Mr. Patil. And also the last act. So I'm sure some of you are counting minutes before I stop speaking, right? um, it's a pleasure to be here. So I know a lot of you here, uh, and I was asked to tell a story of our dairy farm. So it's a pleasure to be here, of course, with all the entrepreneurs of Nasik. And I'm now told Sangli, Pune, Kolhapur. The TLC has a much wider reach than it used to have. Quickly, for those of you who may not know, I come from a background of BD industry, BD business. It's a 90-year-old business, very manual, very rural. And we've had multiple attempts at diversification. So I think my family started diversifying ages ago, I think in the 60s, 70s. So the newspaper Deshdoot was a diversification for our family. There were travel agencies. There were, I think, other kinds of businesses that were done. Eventually, we had a separation within our family. Businesses were divided. But we had the heritage of diversifying. Because my father ran all the businesses at that point of time, so he was used to diversifying, he was used to doing some new things from the beginning. So with that heritage, we also, eventually after the separation, we also diversified much more, and this is all before I started working. We had a tobacco processing plant in Gujarat, which was not meant for our own consumption. It was meant for the other tobacco buyers and processing their tobacco. We had a soft drink concentrate called Sudha as a product for many years that we ran. So whatever has been printed about me here, it doesn't have a long list of failures also behind me. We had a red tooth powder, we had a product called Yogi Vitamla, we still have a product called Yogi Kantika. So there's a fair, I would say there's a fair big history of diversification. Some worked, some didn't work. The ones I've been personally involved with have been the hotel business, have been the malls, have been the loyalty programs and the CRM business. I have been involved with a lot of failures as well. The Yogi Vitamla was my failure. Red tooth powder has been my failure. I'm trying to think what else am I forgetting, but there are a bunch of them. I'm here just to share this story of this background. So after this, we're going to talk about a dairy project called Sarda Farms. But this is just the background from where I come. When I started the BD business, our sales guys were pushing us to start a gutka business. Even before, in fact, before I started. And we were very clear even at that time that we would not do the gutka business. For multiple reasons. One, it has a lot of cash, excise evasion involved, and therefore a lot of cash transactions. It's a messy way to sort of work. And we were not very enthused with the idea of gutkas in general. We could see that this is a very, very big opportunity. Eventually, today, I think it's probably a 20,000 crore rupee business category. So it's a very, very large business. But from the beginning, that never sort of interested us. And the reason I'm talking about it is we had a need to diversify. We had a compulsive need to diversify because our core market, core business of BDs, we could see is not going to last for a long time. The entire BD business survives. I don't know if you know this, but the driver of our business is its development or lack of development. So the BD business employs a lot of people nationally. I think the last estimate I heard was about 5 million people, 50 lakh women. And these are mostly in areas and villages where there is no other source of employment. And these ladies have no other employable skills. And 99% of them are women. So we increasingly are irrelevant when development of the country happens. And we could see that this trend has already started. So for example, in Sinnar and Sangamner area now, there are no new BD workers that are being created. Historically, it's been a huge BD producing area, and the old workers are still there, and therefore the old manufacturing is still there. But after the industrialization, after the irrigation, after the big dairy income that region has, BD industry is not relevant, and we are actually quite happy with it and okay with it. We could see this coming. So we increasingly work with the red corridor more and more, right? So it's more north and more east. So it's MP, it's Bihar, it's Jharkhand, it's Bengal, where the development is still not reached. These are parts of country. So we are only relevant, and so BDs are more expensive to produce than cigarettes are actually per piece. It's only with the excise difference that BDs are actually cheaper to buy versus cigarettes are. And so the government has very consciously kept the BD business alive because of the employment and employability. But we could see this is the beginning of the end, and of course the end is going to be, I think it'll last me my lifetime for sure. So it's going to be a big end. It's a very big industry. But we could see that we had to diversify and get into some other businesses. So we had this compulsive almost need and itch to diversify. Despite that, we walked away from the gutka business very early, and this was a very intuitive gut feel that I took, the call that I took at that time to say, this is not kind of something that I want to do. Around this time, I looked at the milk business very, very closely. And so milk traditionally, I don't know how many of you know, but how milk is what Dr. Kurian did for us with his Amul model, with the GCMMF model, is he figured out that there is very low opportunity cost for the farmer on his time and on the feed. So India has some of the lowest productive cows in the world, but we have the lowest cost in the world for milk, by far. So we are cheaper than Europe, we are cheaper than US, we are cheaper, I think, than New Zealand also, which is where almost all the natural resources are virtually free to them. Only because the farmer does not value his time or the feed that is given to cows. So there's no opportunity cost. So as a result, this collection model was evolved in India, where the farmer brings the milk to a collection center, and from that center, it's transported to a processing center, and from the processing center, the packaging processing is done. It comes to a distributor gives it to a retailer, the retailer sort of eventually brings it to us, to the consumers. So I looked at this business very, very closely, I think about 10, 12 years ago. I spent a lot of time, effort, traveled across India, traveled around the world, saw some various models, understood the industry, got some very good consultants. At that time, we had Mr. Sunil Alag of Britannia, ex-Britannia then was working with us. We had another ex-Amul, the first production GM that they had working with us. So very interesting people senior people, knew the industry, and yet it made sense. So on paper, the profits were there. It made sense. But I chose to walk away from it because there was no differentiation. All these dairy guys talked in lakh liters. So no matter who you meet, they will say, I process 5 lakh liters a day, or 2 lakh liters a day, or 1 lakh liter a day. But nobody would talk about their product quality, or nobody would talk about price. And I think historically, this sector had price control. So they are used to growing only with volumes. And that was their orientation. And I knew when I saw whatever I saw, I knew that there is zero differentiation in products. At that time in Nasik, there were more than 30 brands. I mean, if I can call them brands, I don't know. 30 labels of milk available. And we would be the 31st. Now, whoever I met told me at that time that if you can manage the back end, if you can control the collection, you will do well in this business. Now, for us, the collection was the easiest part because of the BD business background that I come from. We operate in all these rural areas. We have great, fantastic relationships there. A lot of goodwill. We understand that area. We have people from those areas that work for us. Relationships going back 50 years, 70 years, 90 years, and so on. So it was a very easy thing for us to sort of get into the milk business, do the collection model, and get on with it. But at that time, I walked away. So there was a lot of synergy, but I walked away because I was not convinced about the product. And it didn't make sense that the quality and the offering that we were having wouldn't have made sense. fast forward after a bunch of years, one of our GMs, one of our senior most GMs, who used to head the BD business at that time, asked me again to say, he was very keen to diversify into the milk business. So I said, there's a lot of work I've done. There's a lot of project reports I've read, made, and made. So I can share that with you. So I did share that with him. And I said, these are my 5 problems with the business. And that's why I didn't go into them. If you can solve these 5 problems, I'm happy to get into the milk business. So he worked at it. He even hired a team. We hired one of the ex-CEOs of cooperative dairies to come and work. And I was really not keen in the sense, I thought I was humoring the GM. So I thought he's a very senior guy. If he spends 20, 30, 40 lakh rupees and waste it also, it's fine. But let me not say no to him. He's so keen. And that's the reason this whole endeavor sort of continued. And the team would come, I would see them maybe once in 3 months, 4 months, and they would present a plan to me saying, we made a small plan, 3 lakh liters. This is the area, we've done the survey, we can do all this. And I would say, no, not making sense, you have to have a differentiated product, or you have to have a product which is of a certain quality at least. They would go back, so finally they came back. The last time they gave it a try, they came back and said, we've made a very small plan, 1 lakh liter. We've identified the farmers, we've done the survey, we know the farmers also, we've listed the farmers. And after 6 months, once we start transacting with them, once we have a relationship with all these guys, we will convert them to the high quality milk that you want. And I thought, no, this is the story I've heard before. What happens, I've seen this in many other places where you start with a very noble intention, then your practical considerations and your practical transactions take over, and your practical pressing needs take over, and then your purpose or ideals are left behind. So I didn't want to set up a plant and then after 6 months, think, oh my God, this is not generating the quality I want. Because then they will say, but we have so much commitment in the market, we have so many traders, we have so many distributors. And at that point to scale back or to pause, you can't hit a pause button on a running business, especially in a process industry, impossible. So I told them, listen, why don't you take 6 months, but produce me the 1 right liter. I don't mind. I said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about the expense, don't worry about your salaries, don't worry about anything, but just produce the 1 right liter. Because if you actually know what you consume as milk today, it's quite not good. How many hands does it go through? How the industry is structured? How many incentives there are to, sort of cheat and loot and adulterate, and it's obnoxious. I mean, you just don't want to know this. So in one of these days, our GM says, we must do the milk business. So eventually the team left. They got frustrated with my saying no. But this GM still had this thing to say, the milk makes a lot of sense. We should get into it. I said, no, so I agree we have to diversify. This is after the mall, I think. This is after the mall was done. So I was clear that, I didn't want to. So we have a very successful hotel in Manali. I am now involved with another company which is very, very successful, and we work with all the hoteliers in the country. But I was sure the hotel business was not for me. I didn't like it so much, personally. You meet a lot, for multiple reasons, I didn't sort of enjoy the business. Mostly personal reasons. But, so in the BD business, I think I've been spoiled in that sense. Whoever we work with, whether it's our distributors, whether it's our suppliers, whether it's our employees, everything is done in a very high trust environment. There are almost no written contracts. There are almost no written documents. I mean, we are seen as the crazy people in our industry who have so much written work, but compared to the other industries, we do almost nothing. Even if you want some money, you pick up the phone, call up a distributor and say, my guy is coming, will you please give him the money? It gets done. No problem. Very high trust environment. Compared to that, hotels are very low trust environments. I didn't enjoy that. Then I did the mall business. And mall is a very high friction environment. So where collecting the rent is another challenge altogether. I mean, you have 30, 40, 50 page agreements and documents made, and the tenant has a battery of lawyers on his side. We have a battery of lawyers on our side. And it's just a very, very high friction business. It's just poor intent. So nobody here intends to really honor the transactions. And it's not a fun business to be in. So I was thinking, do I want to do this all my life? So we are very good. We are in fact the only mall that got launched in 2008 and actually lived to tell the tale. In that year, nothing got launched. All the projects that were to be launched, nothing got launched. And since then, the mall industry and the mall business has not really looked up again. We do very well. Our footfalls are growing very well. Our business is doing exceedingly well. So on the number side, we are doing really, really well. No problem at all. But again, I thought this is not something I want to do. I mean, this is not something that makes sense for me. Is this the place I want to scale and grow? Certainly not. Is the mall business? It has many problems, but amongst them is the biggest one is the friction that we have to collect money. It's ridiculous. And so we do it. I mean, we are good at it. So, but it's just that it's not something I enjoy. So while doing this, we figured out some parameters. So we and this GM sat down and said, okay, why don't we discuss the parameters of how do you want to select a new business, right? So one of them was clearly that we do not want to be a crony capitalist. We are not good. I'm not built for it. So in other words, we don't want a single business where government relationship is the driver of our profits, right? So whether it's mines, whether it's telecom licenses, whether it's real estate construction development, whether these are all government driven businesses. I mean, your profitability really, really comes from how tight are you with the government. And I didn't want to be tight with the government by any stretch of imagination. So that was out. I didn't want a high friction business. So that was out. And then we said, why don't we look at businesses, minus these two, everything is fine, right? So we identified, based on what we thought at that point, our skills, our strengths, our capabilities, we identified 3 sectors. We identified healthcare. So we in fact said, I thought, and I still think, so maybe with Mr. Modi coming in, things might get different, but I thought for a long time that our country is actually getting from bad to worse in terms of governance. And it is difficult to escape the government as long as you're successful. And it will get worse. It was getting worse at that point, for sure. So we thought we have to actually get into a business that will work despite the government's disapproval. So one is you have to have a driver, but the other is, I was on the other end. I said, I want to be in a business which, even if the government disapproves, the customers don't care. What are those businesses? So we thought healthcare was one. Because you go to a Hakim, Fakir, anybody, as long as he cures you. Correct? It's as simple as that. We thought education was the other one. NIT did not need accreditation, and NIT did not need certification. If the parents believe this would be good for the kids, I think any education in the country works. And the third we thought was food. We go to any hawker, any restaurant, anything, without seeing any hygiene, without seeing any supply chain, without seeing any certification, gradation, nothing. So we thought the third area to look at would be food. So education we had already earmarked as a family for a non-profit activities. And we do a fair amount of work as a non-profit activity, so we gave up on education. Healthcare, I did a lot of work, understood the business. The returns in food just made a lot more sense. What also made a lot of sense for food for me was our GDP is growing at 6, 7, 8%, depending on the year. Sometimes it's 5.5%, sometimes it's 7%. But our food production is not growing more than 1.5 to 2%. So there's this huge gap, and these are big numbers. To have a 5% gap in a delta on the whole GDP is very, very large. So we thought the capability to produce food will be very valuable. So I don't really care what food we produce, as long as we have the capability to produce food. That was a big part of our reason why we thought food made sense. And the other is, of course, when incomes go up in our country, so a friend and a big tenant in our mall, Kishorji Biani, has a very interesting way to segment India. And he's, so the typical segmentation that the market research guys would do would be A1, A2, B1, B2, and so on. These guys, Kishorji has a very interesting way to do it. He says India 1, India 2, and others. So India 1 is all the people who have domestic help at home is India 1. India 2 is all the people serving India 1. Right? And all others are not even a part of this economy. So it could be your, I don't know, it could be the coolie on a railway station, or it could be a coolie meaning for the freight guys, not for us, not picking up our luggage. He would be in India too. But so he has a very simple way to segment India 1, India 2, India 3. And the big story in India, of course, is a huge percentage of India 2 is converting to India 1 every year. That's the big story of India, and that's the big consumption story of India. And that was a driver of our malls as well. So what happens when this conversion happens? Everybody eats the dal chawal. The poor guy also has a dal chawal, right? When he has a little bit more disposable income, what do they have more? So it's called the protein inflation around the world. So typically the proteins in your diet go up when you have more disposable income and when you move beyond the staples. So it's either poultry, it's either meat, it's either dairy, but it's one of these three areas. So we thought it might be an interesting thing to then get into the milk business all over again. But I knew that I was not happy with the collection model. So we then said, why don't we actually look at the whole value chain and look at the big problem in the value chain. So in the dairy business, for example, there's a lot of people involved in the value chain. So there's a farmer, there's a collection agent, there's a transporter, there's a dairy, then there's a transporter again, there's a whole, distributor, then transporter again, a wholesaler, sometimes not, retailer, then a transport again, and then a consumer. There's a lot of people in that value chain. And I'm not going behind the farmer. Behind the farmer also there are a fair amount of people in that value chain. So we said, what is the biggest bottleneck in this value chain? So for example, a transporter makes more money than the dairy processor makes on per liter of milk. A distributor makes more money and a retailer makes more money per liter of milk than the processor makes. This is a similar product. All the bottled water products, the retailer makes far more money than the manufacturer makes per bottle. So we said, all right, let's look at the value chain and let's look at where is the biggest problem. And the biggest problem appeared to be the farmer. So we said, if we can solve this problem, we can own the entire value chain. Then it's up to us to decide how much do we want to get into this value chain or not. So we actually then chose to become a dairy farmer, not knowing anything of dairy, of course. I mean, not knowing anything about cows, how they give milk or so on and so forth. So we said, all right, if we have to do this, then it makes sense to get in the most difficult part of the value chain, see if we can conquer that part. If we can conquer that part, we have a future in this business. If we can't, then we don't have a future in this business anyways, because the farmer will always quiz you as a dairy processor, because that's where the difficulty lies in the business. So based on this, we embarked on a journey of saying, all right, so me and this general manager of ours, both of us went to Europe, worked in farms for a week personally in different farms, and tried to understand different global models of farming. How do they work? What are the different drivers in different parts of the world on milk production costs? Based on that, set up our first farm. Now this is where the more interesting story to my mind starts. Till now, it's all pretty conventional. How do you select a business? You map out the opportunities, you figure out your parameters, you filter them, and you get an opportunity. So we set up, I think our first shed was about for 250 cows. And we quickly figured out after going to Europe that the gap between us, the Indian herdsman and the Indian dairy farmer and the European one is very, very large. I mean, ironically, we say ki go mata hai, go devta hai, but we treat our cows very horribly. Those guys eat beef, but they treat their cows really well. And they're really focused on cow comfort, and we are really not focused on cow comfort as a country. So we got these 8 cows, first batch. We started housing them, and the next batch was supposed to come from wherever we were buying cows at that time, near Bangalore. And all our cows got some leg infection on their hooves. So what we figured is the concrete level on our farm was not perfect, and therefore there was water pooling, and because of the water there was infection, and because of there were bacteria there, and because of the bacteria, all the cows got infected. So we actually ran the farm with, I think, 8 cows for about 4 months. And obviously cows have to be milked every day. We have this huge milking parlor which has to be run just for 8 cows. So the cleaning cost of the cow, the milking parlor every day was very, very high. But we just put our foot down to say, unless we figure out how to deal with 8 cows well, there's no point in buying the 9th cow. I mean, it just does not make any sense. There's no point multiplying your problems. And of course, we had the whole staff for 250 cows. We had the whole equipment set up for 250 cows, everything done. And the cost was haywire. The unit cost, of course. But, I mean, we thought it's something we are learning, so it's fine, doesn't really matter. After about 2-3 months, we figured out how to fix the concrete. We figured out these cows are now staying in our barn without any infection. We started adding more cows. We got an expat manager who set up this dairy for global standards, global processes, global protocols, and so on. And the milk started coming. So we were again very clear that so on day one we knew that our milk will be more expensive because we don't have zero opportunity cost for a labor, nor do we have zero opportunity cost for a feed. So our milk cost per liter is not comparable to the farmer who's selling it to a cooperative. It's just not comparable. I mean, we are out of whack, completely out of whack. So we knew we would have to sell this to people who would value the quality, and therefore we were clear that it cannot be an institutional buyer. It can't be the hotels, it can't be the food processors, it cannot be the ice cream companies, because they would buy based on parameters and based on price, tendering. They would not value this entire narrative of where this milk is coming from, and how this milk is so different than the other milk. Now, of course, this was all an idea. We had not really had 1 liter of milk produced when this entire thinking was going on. So when our first milk sort of started coming out, we took 100 guinea pigs in Nasik, all friends and family, and started sending them milk without telling them any communication. So there's no communication about what kind of a farm have we set up. There's no communication, there's no marketing at all. We just wanted to figure out that would the residential consumers actually taste the difference. Then your marketing is very simple. If your customer can tangibly understand your benefit, then your marketing is very, very simple. If your customer cannot tangibly understand your benefit, then your communication exercise is just that much larger. So in the first 3 weeks, we figured out that our customers can actually tangibly tell the difference. They do understand that this milk is different. They can taste the difference. More importantly, we understood that the habits and the behavior in the house around milk was changing in 3 weeks only. So kids were having milk straight off the bottle. This milk did not be heated again, boiled again in your house, because it was already pasteurized and the whole cold chain was maintained by us till the doorstep. So the taste matters. So I don't want to bore you with nitty-gritty details, but in milk is 85% water and 15% solids. Wherever there's more water, there is very low shelf life. So a shelf life of a food product is directly proportionate to water content in it. That's why dry fruits last so long. That's why pickles last so long. Because in pickling, basically what you do is you take oil and you replace the entire water in that product. Right? And therefore, the bugs cannot survive in the density of the oil. Their cell walls collapse. And therefore, pickling works. Therefore, sweet pickling also works. If your sugar syrup has a certain density and a certain intensity, that pickling also works. The murabbas work on that basis. So milk has a very low shelf life because it's 85% water. And it degrades almost instantaneously the minute it comes out from the cow. So unless you don't freeze it and chill it instantly, and unless there's a lot of hygiene and health that is not looked after, I think every 20 minutes at ambient room temperature at about 30 degrees, every 20 minutes the milk bacteria double. So you can imagine the geometric rate at which they grow if you leave it out for, say, 4 hours. And these bacteria are growing at the expense of the nutrition in the milk, correct? So by the time this milk reaches the dairy, the nutrition is gone. The dairy then standardizes the milk again. They add milk powder, and it's legal in our country to add milk powder. And it's legal in our country to add a whole bunch of things to milk that you don't even want to know. And I mean, camel milk is also fine. Can you believe? They can add camel milk and call it pasteurized milk, toned milk, double toned milk, it's fine. They can add skill milk powder to it, and that's fine. It need not be natural milk. So there's a lot of problems with the milk coming in, and the dairies tweak the product. They tweak the parameters on the product, and then they sell this stuff. The nutritional value is just not there because all the esoteric micronutrients are all gone. So we maintain this cold chain all the way, and we wanted to see if the product is tangibly different. We got a lot of good feedback on the product that made our life very simple. So based on that, we figured out that sampling is the best exercise for us. We don't have to communicate too much, as long as the customer tries the product. So our conversion rates on sampling are 75%, roughly. Our conversion rates on direct marketing are very, very high. We get 12% responses and 6% conversions on direct marketing if we provide very low sampling. If the same sampling, if a trial goes up to a month, then it goes to about 75%. So we do really, really well. Then eventually we said, all right, we've got the product, we've got the processes, and so we started doing all direct distribution. One of our promises, of course, was this is straight from the farm and there's no intermediary involved because it's the intermediaries that mess it up. Like Mr. Patil was also saying, if you have a unique product to sell, you cannot rely on the channel. Because the channel will not want you to be unique. That's where their strength lies. They want 5 suppliers to be the same so that they can play one against the other and get the most margin out of them. This is our number one challenge, for example, in the Apple Country Hotel, that we are a very different hotel and we try to provide very differentiated services. But because a huge source of our business is travel agents, and those are channel partners, they just are not equipped to sell us in the way we can be sold. More importantly, they're not interested to sell us in the way we can be sold because their margins will then reduce because we will be a differentiated product and we will need them less. So we figured that we cannot use channel partners on this. We figured that all the conventional standard distributors of newspapers and dairy in the morning are only interested in volume. They are not interested in parameters like temperature, for example. Don't just care, as simple as that. What we also understood is, market mechanism is a very, very good mechanism to allocate resources. It's better than socialism right now, correct? And that's what in the last 50 years, 100 years, the Cold War is sort of proved, or the end of Cold War is proved. Let's think about how let's just take a minute to think about how these resources are allocated in a market better. Market actually has a big transaction cost. So every cost inside a market has a transaction cost. Transaction costs are typically of 3 kinds. One is of seeking information, getting information. The other is negotiating. And the third is enforcing. These transaction costs are much higher in a market than, say, inside your companies. Because we run our companies actually almost the opposite of markets, don't we? Where not every transaction is negotiated. Many things are just told, from tomorrow, I want the floor to be swept like this, and it's done. It's not negotiated. It's not a market transaction in that sense. So what we figured is the markets are very, very good because they deal with the variance in supply and demand very well. This is the best mechanism to deal with so our neighborhood Kirana guy, right, does not know today how many Colgates will he be selling. He has no clue. Therefore, what does he do? He stocks. So today 6 may be sold, 10 may be sold, doesn't matter, he's got a stock of 2 dozen. So we have all these intermediaries in the market who are basically taking care of the variance in demand and supply. And price is the only arbitrator there. Therefore, so markets are very, very good as a mechanism because they adjust the price and they deal with the demand and supply variance. In the milk business, our cows give a fixed amount of milk every day, and our customers need also a regular amount of milk every day, more or less. I mean, there are some variances, but more or less, every household has a reasonably fixed pattern of milk consumption. So we figured we don't need the market intermediaries in this because there is actually no variance. And if there is no variance in demand and supply, if the supply is reasonably fixed and predictable, and if the demand is reasonably fixed and predictable, then the intermediation has a needless transaction cost, which is not required really. And especially with internet, mobile apps, what have you, information can just flow very, very fast and very, very freely. So we chose this model of doing the entire integration from end to end, And we deliver, for example, in Bombay also directly with our own people, with our own employees, and there's no intermediary involved. For multiple reasons. One, adulteration is a big worry. So we can track our own people. It's very differentiated. So we track them on the variance on the time. We track them on the variance on the temperature. Everybody has a GPS handheld instrument. We now, in about a week, we are getting a map in our office which will show us exactly where each delivery boy right now is as a live map. So it's very high tech. We can do all this with a channel partner, impossible. So based on this, now this entire thing, I don't know if this was evident from my talk or not, but we were very, very, very focused on the milk quality and the experience of the milk for the customer. So right from day one, where the collection business made a lot of sense, we walked away from the milk business because the product was not good and the experience was not good. And till today, our entire endeavor has been to focus only and only on the experience of our customer and the product that we are delivering. Whatever we have to do, we will do for that. We are saying, fine, it's not done before, doesn't really matter, how can we do this? So we have a call center, for example, in Nashik, which deals with milk customers. So our customers can call and say, I want more milk tomorrow, I want less milk today. I don't think anybody's approached milk like this. We have a web app, we have a mobile app, we have reasonably high-tech distribution operations. We have reasonably high-tech farm operations. We are now doing our own integration. So for example, we have collaborated and tied up with the largest lab in the US for feed analysis, cattle feed analysis. And we've opened the lab in Nashik now. So there's nobody doing cattle feed analysis in India at all. Whatever little is being done, it's rubbish. It's certainly not very useful. So we are very, very integrated, we are very focused, but we are completely focused on this entire idea of having the best milk quality delivered directly to our doorsteps of our customers. We also have institutional customers. So we have mithai guys who value the quality and who understand, oh, this makes me better rasgullas or this makes me better paneer. And like Mr. Patil was saying, they are profitable, they understand, they pay a premium for the milk that we deliver, and it works really well. We have never seen, we are a very small player in this large industry, very, very small player. I mean, we are not even a drop in the bucket in the ocean. We have not got, I have never seen this kind of an interest level that we have seen in this business. So number one, even today, we have operational constraints that are stopping us from growing faster. It's not the market. Number two, we really had to do nothing in Bombay except for going to friends and family because they got us more customers, those customers got us more customers. And it's a classic domino effect that is working for us, even today. It's our operational constraints that are actually holding us back more. The market is there, no problem at all. The who's who of Bombay consumes our milk today. Lots of private equity offices, for example, consume our milk today. Lots of bank chairmen consume our milk today in their homes. Lots of Bollywood, lots of industrialists. Really. So we've got traction like I wouldn't have believed, actually. Zero marketing and sales effort in the conventional way. We got at least 7-8 write-ups nationally. So right from the Times of India to the Calcutta newspapers to the Chennai newspapers. And these were all reluctantly done. We were actually not launching Bombay then. And we were said, can you delay your story by 3 months? At least we can leverage your story. And the reporters, of course, are always in a hurry and they wanted it their way. But we got 6, 7, 8. I have had at least 10 private equity players come and visit me in Nashik fishing for investing. We've had 2 large giants come in saying, can we buy some stake with you and can we do work together? Dairy giants or people wanting to enter dairy but large giants otherwise. I have never seen so much interest from the money guys. I have never seen so much interest from the reporting, the media guys. And I have never seen so much interest from the customers, ever. Actually, in all the other businesses that I've done. Everywhere else, we had to do some effort to get that headway, to sort of get that traction. But this entire focus on quality and it's milk, it's commodity. Globally, what the milk we sell, globally in Europe or US or Australia or New Zealand is commodity. It's nothing different. We don't do anything to the milk. In fact, the idea is we do nothing to the milk. Right? It's a commodity. But in a commodity to see this kind of interest is interesting. It's very heartening. And of course, it's a challenge that you don't want to say no to your customers. You don't want to say no to people who are calling and inquiring with phones to say, can I have your milk tomorrow? And in that sense, we have a huge gratitude for Nasik, that Nasik allowed us all the experiments that we did. One Nasik, the friends and family, some of you here in the room also. So it's been a very interesting journey. It was only based on focus. Till 3 months ago, we had no business plan. None whatsoever. Because we were not clear how the money would be made. But we figured that it'll come along, it can't be that far. Monetizing something good is very easy, but creating something good is very difficult. But that entire focus on the customer experience helped, and I kind of completely understand when Mr. Patil also says that, he didn't have a strategy when he started. It just evolved. Only in this case, we consciously did not have a strategy. We knew while entering this that we would not have a strategy except for saying, let's bet on this capability of food production. Let's bet on this capability of delivering last mile. Let's bet on this capability of growing our own feed. Whatever agri. So basically you have to do agronomics. So once you do agronomics, whether you grow cucumber, tomato or corn, it doesn't, you can manage all three because you have the competencies to manage all three. The competencies required are very similar. That was our story so far. I hope I have covered everything that I wanted to cover. I don't like PowerPoint so much, so I prefer not to use them. I prefer an interactive session, but I was explicitly asked to speak more. So I tried my level best to speak more. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here. Okay.
Thanks. It's a very evolving session. I mean, you really enlightened us as far as focus on a priority is concerned. We have some questions. One question is, you have an activity which is B2B,
yes.
like malls.
Yeah.
And you have this activity of B2C.
Correct.
You are catering to end customer directly.
Correct.
So where it is easier to create value, in B2B or B2C?
I think B2C is very intense. So we are going to soon start a banqueting hall in our mall, and I'm dreading it. Because last time I had an operation which was B2C in Nasik, there was a gym we ran. And because I'm local and I'm born and brought up in Nasik, it's even if you don't get a cup of tea right, somebody would call me and say, "Yaar, aaj chai theek nahi thi." So I don't know what would happen in the banquet hall, but but I think B2C is easier if you have some different and imaginative ideas, because you don't have the constraint of the business partner. But B2C takes a lot more investment and it's far more intense. And the feedback is almost instantaneous in B2C, whereas in B2B the feedback sometimes can have a huge lag, depending on the cycles that your partners follow.
So are you sometimes find it difficult to successfully manage both?
Not really.
B2B and B2C?
There are different teams. Actually, so I don't do anything in our office in that sense. Okay. In the sense, I am not an operating person. There are operating teams which sort of deal with each business, and they're good teams, and we are very happy to have who we have. And so it's a different mindset for sure, certainly. I am equally good dealing with both. I just like to understand, I like to see what are the options we have on this one and how can we scale this platform. So it doesn't matter which way does it go.
There's one more question. How and why you selected milk for diversification? I mean, you elaborated on that earlier you have started milk activity and all, but then again, finally...
No, so it was more around the parameters that we had, that we didn't want a government-driven business, we didn't want a friction-driven business, we wanted a very scalable business. So at least a business that had a huge canvas, should we do well? Because, for example, the hotel business in Manali has a very limited canvas. So unless you want to look at hotel business in entire country and that's your canvas, then that's fine. That's a very large canvas. But so similarly, we wanted to look at a very, very large canvas if possible. There is clearly a demand-supply gap that we can see. So we thought this is as good as a product that we can start with. If not that, we would have looked at some other food business anyways.
Food was the.
Food and healthcare is what we were looking at. Those were the two toss-ups.
Yeah. So we know or we understand that you have deployed customer focus to the last mile, last line in your business model. So how did you achieve this? Your delivery person has a solid deployed customer focus attitude. So how you created that in the organization?
I think the toughest one is the culture part. The capabilities also come easier, but the culture took time. You just have to send the signals at the right time, so you don't prioritize wastage. You don't prioritize efficiency, but you prioritize customer comfort. You prioritize, so even if the customer asks for a delivery at say 10 o'clock to say, listen, my bottle broke, we'd say, sure, we'll send you a bottle. Doesn't matter if it goes in a taxi, doesn't matter if it goes in a rickshaw. I think these signals are picked up by people, by the whole team in general, and they know how much effort we put in to get whatever we get right. So our bottle, for example, took us about almost a year to make it. It won a lot of awards eventually across India in many, many advertising forums. But they understand that this is, so our address process, I mean, if I kid you not, but our address process, it takes us at least 2 weeks. People do not give right addresses. And that makes it very difficult. So PIN codes change, sir. People are not aware of them. They have the wrong name for street. They may be calling it Pedder Road, but not Bulabai Desai Road, for example. They will get the building wrong, the block wrong. There are enough variances in our addresses. I mean, I have newfound respect for our postal department. And now we, of course, try to use GPS coordinates for every customer's homes. But to get the first address and the envelope looking right is a huge effort. But that signal is, I mean, the entire organization gets a signal that these guys are willing to put in this so much effort just to get that comma right. And I think that signal of excellence really goes through, I think. So is this, I have a firm belief that every signal has to have a waste in it. If there is no waste, there is no signal. This is an interesting idea. Think about it for a second. But if there is no waste, there is no signal. If your desired outcome of the signal is to get attention, you must have waste in it. For example, the easiest example I can give you is when we get guests at home. If our normal menu is 2 sabzi dal chawal, the day a guest comes, it will be 4 sabzis, 2 namkeens, more dal chawal, 2 mithais, and so on and so forth. It's a waste, isn't it? The guest is not going to eat more, but it's a signal, more importantly. So if you look at the entire consumer behavior from a signaling perspective, who buys what brand, who buys what shirt, it's an interesting world to get into and look into. But internally also in the organizations, these signals work. So people understand wastage and people understand why are they wasting money and how important it is for them. So you really have to in some ways walk the talk, I think, and you have to really waste resources for this signal to be understood. But if this wastage is seen, I think the signal is understood.
Very well said. One more question. How do one decide whether to diversify or focus on your key traditional business?
So if I could help it, I would not diversify at all. Clearly. I mean, it's better to be, Warren Buffett has this very famous principle that he uses, that he does not invest in businesses he does not understand. Mr. Patil also said it, in his talk, that you have to understand the business for insights to happen. So for example, in the BD business, where we are 90 years old, nothing has changed. So I'll give you some examples. Like our process has not changed, it's still manual. Our materials have not changed, they're still the same. The way our BDs are consumed has not changed. So it's a very static business in many ways, right? That your inputs, your raw materials have not changed, your processes have not changed, and your consumption has not changed. Despite that, we have managed to double our margins in the last 7 years. And we have managed to reduce our prices, actually. So we've reduced our prices, doubled our percentage margin, only because we have tremendous insight and deep insight in this business. We have people and capabilities which are so deep and so big that we can leverage them and do so many things differently than a competitor that Right from how we tender our patta to how we train. We are the only guys who invest in, for example, capabilities where we can create a new BD worker in a backward area today. Even if they don't have any experience of creating BDs and they've never seen them, we can train them, for example. No other competitor has these kind of capability. Now, this only comes because we have deep insight into how a BD is made and what kind of flaws can happen. We have in fact, if you go to one of our units, you'll see there are like 36 types of defects, quality defects that can come in a BD, and they're all given with their root causes in a very pictorial way in our units. So there's a tremendous amount of insight, and that only comes when you're there. Now, with the milk also, we are hoping, that's the hope, that this is just the beginning. We are only 2, 3, 4 years old. As we understand this better and better, we are clearly seeing what are the next big opportunities in this dairy industry itself. So our initial plan was to look at a basket perhaps and do organic vegetables and do this. And today I'm not sure we have the bandwidth to do that. Just the milk alone can probably consume our bandwidth for the next 5, 10 years. But this only comes when you're sort of in the business. It won't come. So you have to pay a price for that insight. The last 3 years, I think we paid a price for our insight into the milk business. You know, in Marwadi we have this saying, it's a akkal khati kharcha. Right? Yeah, you have to pay that. There's no way. So in diversification, you have to be prepared to pay that fee. Otherwise, it won't work.
We have many questions for you, but due to time constraint, we'll have the last question. See, you told us that right now you're facing operational constraints to expand this business. So how did one decide, or how did you decide to being on the top of the pyramid rather than at the bottom of the pyramid? That is for the niche market rather than the mass market.
It's one, we can't compete with Amul. I mean, and so in FMCG products, size matters quite a bit, scale matters quite a bit. It's a very fixed cost driven business. Because it's very fixed cost driven, scale matters quite a bit. Number one. Number two, it's easier to start as a Taj Mahal and then go to a gateway and a ginger than to do the journey the other way around. If you start as a ginger and then move to a gateway and then to a Taj Mahal, it's a very difficult journey and it's not a very credible journey. But whereas to dilute standards is very simple. So anyways, you don't get this canvas of starting a business every day, number one. And setting up the culture and the ethos that are required to set up. I think the biggest one to me is the culture. The culture hardens very fast and culture sets very, very fast in an organization. So to me, it's best to start with a culture which is very high. So even our first shed, for example, was as good as a shed you can buy in Europe for the farm. I mean, it has all the automation you can imagine. It has all the technology you can imagine. There's no farm in the world that will be better than this farm as far as the equipment is concerned. We knew this would be more expensive. We knew this would be starting at the top. And we knew we could indigenize it later. But it's best to start and experience the best, experience the excellence, and then having experienced that, take a call. Is it required? Is it prudent? Is it useful and not? So on. So we thought gravity flows downwards. It's easy to go with gravity.
Yeah, I'm unable to resist this last one.
Okay.
I mean, for all of us, for all the entrepreneurs, we would just like to know from you, how do you narrow your focus on key priorities? Whenever you have decided to enter into something, how do you decide to focus on the priorities?
So one, I have a luxury of a very strong P&L and balance sheet behind me. I mean, it really helps. I can't imagine what Mr. Patil would have gone through or what Mr. Bagwe would have gone through when they started from scratch. I mean, that's a different circus altogether to manage compared to what I manage. Or what they must have managed when they started, right? Today, I think their balance sheets are probably better than ours, but it comes down to the fact that I genuinely believe that money is a byproduct of what we do. And we really try to focus on creating value, like Mr. Patil was saying the same thing. And what is value at the end of the day? So if you look up the definition of value, you will find I think hundreds of definitions on the web. I'm sure they're all right in some perspective and some way, but the one I like the most personally is it's creating something useful and desirable. To me, that's the key. The efficiencies are very easy to bring. The cost mindset is very easy to bring, but the cost mindset, the only problem is then you miss the forest for the woods. I mean, if you only have this cost mindset, it's tough. So, for example, with the mall in Nasik, it was the same story. If we had only thought of optimizing cost, we would have not created this mall. Malls only work on aggregation. Malls only work in a certain size and scale. Below that, the aggregation is not there. The customer benefit is the aggregation and the curation that we do for retailer categories and so on and so forth. So, to me, it's just understanding how is this value generated in this business. What is the reason you're allowed this profit by the customers? And just focus on that. The rest, I think, looks after itself, to my mind.
With this, Ain, thanks for this nice session.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.